The year was 410 AD, and the air above Britannia was heavy with silence. The legions were gone, the proud banners of Rome no longer shimmered against the mist. On the old stone roads, weeds began to grow between the cracks, and the watchtowers stood empty, their fires cold. For nearly 4 centuries, Rome had been the spine of this island, its roads, its laws, its gods. And then, almost overnight, that spine was broken. Letters were sent to Rome begging for aid, for soldiers, for salvation. But the empire was dying too, gasping beneath the weight of its own decay. The last message that came was not a promise of help, but a farewell. The citizens of Britain were told to look to their own defense. And so, the island turned inward. The Romans had left, but they left behind ghosts. For those who lived through the unraveling, it must have felt like the end of the world. Towns that once hummed with trade fell to ruin. Villas became tombs for forgotten wealth. Without the army's protection, raiders came swiftly from the sea, from the hills, from the darkness. The Picts stormed south, the Irish sailed east, and the people of Britain, the Romano-Britons, found themselves trapped between collapsing order and encroaching chaos. Yet, even as cities like Londinium faded into silence, something older began to stir. In the ruins, local chieftains claimed the titles once reserved for Roman officials. They built their halls not from marble but from timber and faith. Power was no longer dictated by the empire's laws, but by the strength of a man's sword and the loyalty of his kin. It was an age where history blurred into legend. Chroniclers centuries later would speak of a warlord Artorius, a leader of battles who united the remnants of Rome's sons against the tide of invaders. Whether Arthur lived or not, his story was born in this soil of uncertainty, this desperate century where every victory was a miracle. The people clung to hope as they once clung to the cross and the old gods alike. They sang songs of heroes who held the walls against impossible odds, songs to fill the emptiness left by the fading world. For when the light of civilization dims, myth becomes its torchbearer. In the stillness after Rome, the land itself seemed to remember. Forests crept over old roads. The earth reclaimed the temples and amphitheaters. But beneath that quiet surface, a new story was taking shape, raw, tribal, and unrecorded. The Roman world had written its history in ink. The new world would carve it in blood and iron. Among the mist and marsh, the children of Britannia grew wild, fierce, untamed. They were neither Roman nor wholly Celtic, something in between, something forming. The old order was gone, but the land was not empty. It was waiting for new kings, new faiths, new myths to root themselves in its soil. And so began the long dawn after the empire's fall, an age of warriors and wanderers, of languages colliding and gods changing their names. The fall of Rome was not an ending, but a passage, a birth through fire. Out of the ashes of empire, the first breaths of Anglo-Saxon England began to stir, faint and uncertain, beneath the gray British sky. The wind came from the east, cold and sharp as iron. Across the gray waters of the North Sea, long shadows moved ships, slender and swift, their curved hulls biting the waves like the teeth of wolves. They came not as conquerors at first, but as seekers. Angles, Saxons, and Jutes tribes of the northern coasts, hardened by frost and hunger. To them, the land that once bowed to Rome was a realm of abandoned riches, a sleeping giant waiting to be taken. They had heard the whispers carried by traders. Britain lies empty, its walls unguarded. And so they came, drawn by promise and peril, their sails white against the storm. The first arrivals were mercenaries, hired swords in a land desperate for defense. Briton chieftains, desperate to stem the raids of the Picts and Scots, called upon these northern strangers to fight for gold and land. Among them, legend names 2 brothers, Hengist and Horsa, their names meaning stallion and horse. They were warriors of Kent, or would soon make it so. At first, they were allies, but allies turn to conquerors when their reward is not enough. What began as defense became invasion. The sea wolves saw land fractured and weak, and their hunger grew. Villages burned, fields were taken. The old Roman towns were plundered, their stones repurposed for halls of new kings who spoke no Latin prayers. The transformation was swift and brutal. The Romano-Britons, once masters of a Roman world, became refugees in their own homeland. Some fled west, into the mountains of Wales or across the sea to Armorica, a land that would one day be called Brittany. Others stayed, submitting or blending into the rising tide. The invaders brought not just sword and flame, but language, law, and legend of their own. The English tongue began here, not in grandeur, but in blood. The Angles from Schleswig, the Saxons from the Elbe, the Jutes from Jutland, their speech mingled in the air until even the old Latin words began to fade. Britain was being reborn not by choice, but by conquest. And yet, even amid the violence, there was creation. New villages rose where the legions once marched. The timber halls of chieftains stood tall above the ruins of Roman villas. They worshipped under open sky to Woden, to Thunor, to Tu gods who demanded courage and honored strength. Every feast, every oath, every raid was both act of war and act of faith. They sang of fate, word the unseen power that wove all lives together, unchangeable as the sea. In this belief, death was not to be feared. It was the fulfillment of one's thread in the great tapestry of being. By the 6th century, the pattern was clear. The land had fractured into new realms: Kent, Wessex, Sussex, East Anglia, Northumbria. Each a kingdom forged by the sword, yet bound by a strange new identity that was forming. Engleland, the land of the Angles. Its birth was neither clean nor merciful, but it was unstoppable. And still, from the ashes of battlefields and burning halls, myths grew. The sea-wolves, who came seeking plunder, had sown the seeds of a new people, one whose story was only just beginning, beneath the low northern sun. By the dawn of the 6th century, the chaos had settled into patterns fragile, glittering like frost. The sea-wolves were no longer raiders, they were rulers. Across the land, kingdoms took shape, each born of ambition and blood. Kent, ruled by the descendants of Hengist; Wessex, rising in the southern hills; Northumbria, stretching toward the misty edge of the world. Between them lay shifting borders, uncertain oaths, and the constant tremor of war. The kings of this new age ruled not from marble palaces but from timber halls, where smoke curled to rafters blackened by years of feasting and fire. In these halls, loyalty was forged over mead and oath rings, and a man's worth was measured in his courage and his kin. Power, in this world, was a living thing, earned, contested, and never secure. The concept of kingship itself was still being born. A king was not a distant monarch, but the first among warriors, a signing, literally, of the kin. He ruled because his bloodline inspired loyalty, because the gods smiled upon his deeds, and because his warriors believed his word was stronger than theirs. When a king fell, his followers did not just lose a leader. They lost their bond to the divine thread that held their lives together. Betrayal, vengeance, and honor danced a deadly waltz in these early courts. To slay a lord was to unmake a world. To avenge him was to restore it. Yet beneath the roar of feasts and the clash of swords, something deeper was forming a culture of words. The Anglo-Saxons, for all their ferocity, were poets. They carried their stories in memory, their history in song. The scop, the singer, held more power than the sword could grant. In the glow of firelight, he would chant of heroes long dead and deeds yet to be done. Names like Sedmon and Sinu-Yulf would echo in later centuries, but even now, the seeds of English verse were sown in rhythm, in alliteration, in the mournful beauty of the word weird. They sang of fleeting glory, of exile and belonging, of the sea's endless call. The voice of a people was awakening. But this age of kings was not all splendor and song. Behind every victory lay a graveyard, behind every crown, a curse. The kingdoms that rose in glory fell just as swiftly, consumed by rival kin or betrayed from within. Ethelbert of Kent brought law and trade and was haunted by the memory of the faith that once ruled Rome. Penda of Mercia, the last great pagan king, ruled with brilliance and brutality, standing defiant against both Christian missionaries and neighboring realms. Alliances were woven and broken like spider silk, each strand glistening in morning dew before it was torn by ambition. Still, Through this chaos, something enduring began to emerge, the fragile notion of an English identity. The old tribes, Angles, Saxons, Jutes, were beginning to think of themselves as one people. The warlords who carved their realms from fire and blood had unknowingly set the foundation for a nation. It was not yet England, not yet united, but its shadow was visible in the morning mist. The web of kings and kin, tangled though it was, would one day hold the shape of a kingdom. But before that dawn, the island would face another reckoning, not with the sword, but with the soul. For the old gods still ruled the forests, and a new faith was stirring in the east. The land of the early Anglo-Saxons was a haunted one caught between two worlds, two faiths, two eternities. Beneath the roots of oaks and the stones of the barrow mounds, the old gods still whispered. Their names Woden, Thunor, Tiyu, and Frigg carried the weight of thunder, war, and fate. They were not distant beings in marble temples, but living spirits woven into the rhythm of life itself. Every stream, every grove, every hill was alive with presence. To the early English, faith was not a matter of doctrine. It was breath, blood, and earth. They wore charms against evil spirits, cast runes to seek the will of the unseen, and laid their dead with care, weapons in hand, eyes toward the sun. Death was not an ending. It was a journey into the mists, guided by ancestors whose bones slept beneath the soil. Archaeologists today uncover these beliefs in silence. A jeweled brooch buried in Sutton Hoo's royal tomb, a cremation urn adorned with serpent patterns, the faint traces of fire rituals beneath pagan fields. Each relic is a heartbeat from a vanished faith. The burial mounds that rose above the rivers of East Anglia were monuments not of despair, but of defiance, symbols of a people asserting that their souls, like their swords, would endure. Yet even as the smoke of their pyres drifted heavenward, another kind of fire began to burn from across the sea. In 597 AD, a man in a simple robe set foot upon Kent's shore. Augustine, envoy of the Roman Church, bearing not weapons, but the word. When King Ethelbert of Kent met Augustine, it was a moment that would change the island's spirit forever. Ethelbert's queen, Bertha, was already Christian, a Frankish princess who prayed in an old Roman church at Canterbury. The king listened to Augustine's message with caution and curiosity. For the Anglo-Saxons, loyalty was the highest virtue, and loyalty to old gods was not easily abandoned. But Augustine offered something powerful. Not conquest, but continuity. The cross, he said, did not destroy the past. It fulfilled it. Within a generation, churches rose beside sacred groves, and the words of Latin prayers mingled with the echoes of pagan chants. The conversion was not simple nor swift. In Northumbria, the great King Edwin hesitated between his ancestral gods and the faith of Rome. His council debated, their minds torn between tradition and transcendence. Then spoke a nobleman, Coifi, a high priest who saw wisdom in the new light. He said, "The life of man, O king, is like the flight of a sparrow through a mead hall on a winter's night brief, flickering between darkness and darkness. If this new faith brings knowledge of what lies beyond, it is well to follow it." And so Edwin accepted baptism. Across the island, other kings followed, some in faith, some in politics, but all reshaping the soul of their people. Still, the old gods did not vanish overnight. They lingered in the language in days of the week, in stories and symbols, in quiet rituals the church could not erase. The English became Christian, but they remained children of the earth. Their crosses stood where sacred trees once grew. Their psalms carried echoes of ancient song. The fusion of old and new birthed a culture unlike any other one, where monks illuminated manuscripts in golden script, while farmers still whispered charms over their crops. It was in this tension between light and shadow that the English spirit took form, grounded in soil, yet reaching for heaven. And through it all, the dead watched from their graves, kings buried with both sword and cross, their tombs bridging two worlds. For faith in this new land was not about the death of the old, but the transformation of belief itself. The gods of the forests gave way to the God of salvation, but both spoke the same eternal truth, that no world truly dies, it only changes its name. The winds of the early Anglo-Saxon period had long since settled, Yet their echoes lingered in every hollow and hill of England. By 660 AD, the land had been reshaped by fire and faith, by steel and song. Kingdoms now stood with names that would endure. Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, Northumbria. The old Roman roads were overgrown, the villas decayed into memory, yet the people who walked those paths carried the blood of conquerors and natives alike. Their language, their laws, their stories, all bore witness to a time when myth and history collided. Here, in the quiet of valleys and the shadow of great forests, the pulse of a nation was rising, fragile but undeniable. The treasures of this age tell stories more vivid than any chronicle. In Sutton Hoo, a ship burial lay hidden beneath the earth, preserving not just gold and silver, but the essence of a world that believed in both mortality and immortality. Each ornate clasp, every weapon, every helmet, spoke of courage, loyalty, and the sacred duty of kings and warriors. It was a civilization that honored life through its death, and death through its art. The Anglo-Saxons were builders and destroyers, poets and warriors, men who could wield a sword as deftly as they could craft a hymn. Their world was both violent and beautiful, fleeting and eternal. And yet, amid all this growth, the land still remembered its first losses. The Romano-Britons, pushed to the edges, left traces of memory in stones and place names, in myths that refused to die. Stories of Arthur, whether king or myth, wandered the forests, a reminder that history is not only written in chronicles, but whispered in legend. The Anglo-Saxon age was a bridge between what had been and what would come, between pagan fires and Christian crosses, between fractured clans and the first murmurs of a united realm. Every grave, every hall, every grove carried a fragment of the past forward, shaping a culture that would endure beyond the centuries. This age, though distant, is not lost. It is in the rhythm of the English language, in the days named for gods and kings, in the poems that echo heroism and despair. It is in the very soil of England, where archaeologists uncover long-buried mounds and realize that every artifact is a voice, every ruin a story still waiting to be heard. The early Anglo-Saxons built not just kingdoms, but memory itself, a memory that hums beneath the surface of history, waiting to awaken. Their world was harsh and fleeting, yet it laid the foundations of a nation that would rise from its myths and shadows. Because the past is never truly gone. It's waiting to be reborn. In the mists of dawn, among the graves and groves of an ancient England, the voices of warriors, poets, and kings still whisper. Their swords have rusted. Their fires have faded. Their gods have changed names, yet their stories endure. They remind us that history is not a silent tomb, but a living presence, a force that shapes us even when we do not see it. In remembering them, we walk with them once more, and the legends of the early Anglo-Saxon age, when myths ruled the land, breathe again.